Here's a number that should stop you cold. Nearly 1 in 5 Americans over the age of 65 is still working. Not volunteering, not consulting for the fun of it. Working, because the paycheck hasn't stopped mattering. For most of the last century, retirement was the reward at the end of the deal. You put in the years and then you got to stop. But for a growing share of Americans, that final chapter keeps getting pushed back, thinned out, or quietly canceled. This is the economics of a retirement that never comes. And it turns out to be less a story about bad personal choices than about who got left holding the risk. Retirement, as a normal stage of life, is younger than you'd think. For most of human history, people worked until their bodies quit, and then they leaned on their families. There was no golden phase at the end. It got built on purpose in the 20th century, and it rested on 2 pillars. The first was Social Security. Signed into law in the 1930s, it's a federal program funded by payroll taxes. And here's the part people forget. It was designed as a floor, not a full paycheck. It replaces only about 40% of what an average worker earned before retiring. It was meant to keep older Americans out of poverty, not to fund a comfortable life on its own. The second pillar was the company pension. In the decades after World War II, big employers promised something specific. Work here long enough, and we'll pay you a set monthly check for the rest of your life. That's called a defined benefit plan, and the key word is benefit. The company guaranteed the number. The company took the investment risk. If the market crashed, that was the company's problem, not yours. Put those 2 pillars together, and you get the mid-century idea that most of us still carry around in our heads. Work until 65, then stop and be okay. For a couple of generations, for a lot of people, that actually held. And then one of those pillars quietly crumbled. Over the past 40 years, the private sector pension went from common to nearly extinct. If you work for a state or a city, you might still have one. If you work for a private company, odds are you don't, and probably never will. Nobody held a press conference to announce it. The guarantee just stopped being offered to new hires, one company at a time, until an entire way of funding old age had faded out. What replaced it looked at first like an upgrade. It wasn't quite that simple. Start with what people have actually saved, because the gap between the dream and the balance sheet is where this whole story lives. For Americans aged 55 to 64, the one standing right at the edge of retirement, the median amount saved in retirement accounts is about $185,000. Median means the middle. Half have saved more, half have saved less. You'll sometimes see a bigger number, over $500,000, quoted as the average. But that average is misleading because a small number of very large accounts drag the mean way up. The middle household, the typical one, is sitting closer to that $185,000, and roughly 1 in 5 adults over 50 has essentially nothing saved at all. Now put that number to work. $185,000 sounds like a lot until you ask it to replace a paycheck for 20 or 30 years. Using a common rule of thumb for how much you can safely pull out each year, that balance throws off somewhere around $7,000 a year. That's a few $100s a month. A cushion, not a second income. Now, you might be thinking about the house. And yes, if you fold in home equity, the picture looks a little better. The median net worth for that same age group, home included, is around $365,000. But a paid-off house doesn't buy groceries. To turn it into spending money, you have to sell it, borrow against it, or die and leave it behind. It's wealth you mostly can't eat. So most people lean on Social Security. The average retired worker's check in 2026 is about $2,075 a month. Call it $25,000 a year. To put that in perspective, if it were an hourly wage for full-time work, it would come out to roughly $12 an hour. And remember, that check was built to replace only about 40% of your old earnings. The rest, in theory, comes from savings you mostly don't have. Then there's the cost that blindsides people: health care. Medicare, the federal health insurance you qualify for at 65, covers a lot, but it doesn't cover everything, and the gaps add up. One large financial firm estimates that a 65-year-old retiring today will spend, on average, about $172,000 on healthcare over the rest of their life. And that figure doesn't even include long-term care, the nursing home, or the home aid, which is often the single biggest expense of all. So line it up. A modest retirement can easily cost $50,000 or more a year. Social Security covers about half of that for a typical retiree. Savings cover a sliver, and the math, for millions of people, simply doesn't close. So where did the guaranteed check go? Follow the money, and it leads to one of the biggest quiet shifts in American economic life. Starting in the late 1970s and accelerating through the 80s, companies began trading the pension for something new, the 401k. Instead of promising you a monthly check for life, your employer now just helps you save into an investment account, sometimes matching part of what you put in. Whatever that account grows to is what you get. That's called a defined contribution plan, and the shift in that phrase is everything. The company no longer defines the benefit, it only defines the contribution. If the market drops the year you retire, that's your problem now. For employers, this was a very good trade. A pension is an open-ended promise that can balloon for decades. A 401k match is a predictable, capped cost they can budget to the dollar. The risk of funding old age came off the company's books, and it landed on yours. That same shift created an enormous new industry. Trillions of dollars now sit in 401k plans and individual retirement accounts, and that money has to be managed, recorded, and invested by financial firms. They charge fees for it. Those fees often look tiny, a fraction of a percent a year, easy to ignore. But a small slice of a very large number, taken every year for decades, quietly eats a real chunk of your final balance. You rarely see it. It just means less money at the end. And around the edges of all this sits a second layer of the industry, selling products to plug the gaps the system leaves open. Annuities, long-term care insurance, complicated contracts with fine print most buyers never fully read. Social Security runs on completely different plumbing. It's pay-as-you-go. The payroll taxes coming out of today's workers' checks pay today's retirees directly. There's no personal account with your name on it. That design worked beautifully when there were plenty of workers per retiree. In 1960, there were more than 5 workers paying in for every person drawing benefits. Today, it's under 3 to 1 and falling. There's one more quirk worth knowing because it shapes who funds the whole thing. Social Security taxes only apply to income up to a cap, $184,500 a year. Earn a dollar above that, and that dollar isn't taxed for Social Security at all. So a nurse pays the tax on every dollar she makes. A top executive stops paying it partway through the year. That single design choice is one big reason the program's math has gotten tighter over time, as more and more of the country's income has piled up above that cap. So who actually foots the bill for growing old in America? It comes in layers, and the order matters. Layer 1 is Social Security, the base almost everyone stands on. For a huge share of older Americans, it isn't the foundation, it's the whole house. By one widely cited survey, close to 40% of seniors rely on Social Security for essentially all of their income. Now, other estimates that match survey answers against tax records put that share lower, closer to 14%, so the exact figure is genuinely debated. But every serious source agrees on the shape of it. A very large number of older Americans lean on that one check for most of what they live on. Layer 2 is personal savings, the 401k, and the individual retirement account. For the typical household, as we saw, that layer is thin. Layer 3 is increasingly just keep working. That's the nearly 1 in 5 people over 65 still on the job. For many of them, work isn't a passion project. It's the layer that keeps the other layers from collapsing. Layer 4 is family, and it's the layer the official numbers almost never capture. Adult children quietly covering a parent's rent or medications, a daughter cutting back to part-time to drive mom to appointments. This is unpaid work, done for free. That would cost a fortune if anyone actually had to buy it on the open market. It never shows up as a line item, but it's holding up millions of retirements all the same. And it runs the other way too, parents who can never afford to help their own kids. So the strain just rolls downhill to the next generation, which now has to save for its own old age and subsidize the last one at the same time. And the final layer, the one nobody plans for, is the government program of last resort. Here's a distinction that trips up almost everyone. Medicare is the health insurance you get at 65, no matter your income. Medicaid is a separate joint federal and state program for people with very low income and almost no assets. And it's Medicaid, not Medicare, that pays for long-term nursing care, but only after you've spent down nearly everything you own to qualify. So the house you paid off, the savings you built, the estate you hope to leave behind, the money left to your heirs after death, can be consumed almost entirely before that last safety net kicks in. Every plan to fix a thin retirement runs into the same advice. Just work a few more years. It sounds airtight. Delay retirement, save longer, claim a bigger check. And for the people who can pull it off, it genuinely helps. The problem is that working longer is not something you fully control. Here's the number that quietly demolishes the whole strategy. In a recent national survey, 46% of retirees, nearly half, said they left work earlier than they'd planned. Workers expect, on average, to retire around 65. The average age they actually stop is 62, and more than 3/4 of those early exits happen for reasons entirely outside the person's control. About 40% were forced out by a health problem or a disability. Around a third were pushed out by a layoff, a buyout, or a company that downsized or closed. So the single most common fix for a shortfall, work longer, is exactly the thing that gets taken away from the people who need it most. And getting pushed out at 62 instead of 65 isn't a small setback. You lose 3 years of contributions, you start drawing down savings 3 years sooner, and you hit a brutal gap. Medicare doesn't start until 65, so you're buying your own health insurance for 3 years right when you can least afford it. And the plan B, just find another job, is a lot harder than it sounds for an older worker. Someone laid off from a long-held position in their late 50s or 60s often faces a much longer search than a younger applicant and frequently has to take a real pay cut just to get back in the door. The market doesn't line up neatly with the advice. There's more hidden in the fine print. Claim Social Security early at 62 and you lock in a permanently smaller check for the rest of your life. And there's the enormous unpaid cost of caregiving. Millions of people cut their own hours or quit entirely to care for an aging parent, losing income and their own retirement savings in the process, only to face the exact same wall themselves a couple of decades later. Even inflation quietly does its work. Yes, Social Security gets a cost of living adjustment each year, but the things older people spend the most on, healthcare and housing, often climb faster than that raise. None of this was a villain twirling a mustache. The move from pensions to 401k plans came with real advantages. Your savings became portable. You could carry them from job to job instead of losing a pension when you switched. You got control over your own money. Those are genuine benefits. But control and risk are the same coin. The moment your retirement became something you build yourself, it also became something you can fail to build through bad luck, flat wages, or a career with gaps. The system quietly assumes a very specific person, someone with a steady decades-long job, an employer match, the spare income to save, and the good health to keep working right up to the finish. Reward that person, and the model works beautifully. It just doesn't describe most people's lives. And the demographics are pressing down on all of it. The baby boomers are retiring in enormous numbers. Fewer workers are coming up behind them. Everyone is living longer, which means the money has to stretch further. On current projections, Social Security's main trust fund runs short in the early 2030s. That doesn't mean the checks stop. After that point, incoming taxes could still cover about 78 cents on every dollar of promised benefits unless Congress acts first. Other wealthy countries handle this differently, leaning more on mandatory pooled systems. The American model leans harder on the individual. Neither approach is free. They just decide who carries the risk. So what does the modern American retirement actually deliver? For someone with a stable career, steady raises, an employer match, and good health, it can work. It can even work generously. That version is real. What the system does not do is guarantee anything. It took a stage of life that mid-century America started treating almost like a right, and it turned that into a private project you have to fund yourself under conditions you don't fully control. The result isn't that retirement vanished, it's that it split in two. A real retirement for the people who could build one, and a receding horizon for everyone else, a finish line that keeps sliding away or arrives too early and too thin to stand on. The money didn't disappear, it moved. Off of employers' books, onto households, and into the accounts of the industry that manages the difference. And that's the quiet truth underneath all these numbers. The bill for growing old in America increasingly comes with your name on it. whether or not the paycheck that was supposed to cover it ever stops. If this breakdown helped you see where the money actually goes, consider liking the video and subscribing. We read the long, boring reports so you don't have to. Thanks for watching.